So we've been talking in the last couple of weeks about the Gospels, and one of the things I said we'd do is go through each of the Gospels in turn and just introduce them. So we're going to start with the Gospel of Matthew. We know there are 4 Gospels, and the Gospel of Matthew is the first one. It's the one that opens the New Testament, the very first book of the New Testament. So one of the questions we often have is, why are there 4 Gospels and why are they different? And we have to kind of put aside our modern notions of getting a story right in terms of chronological order, and this happened after that, and then this was followed by something else. We like to get this, our chronological order of things right in modern sense of history. We need to put that aside because that's not really the aim of the Gospels. The Gospels are not trying to say, well, this happened after that. They're not trying to get a chronological order of things. They're trying to make a particular point. They're trying to address a particular audience. Now we see this in Matthew's Gospel. Matthew is written to the Jews. And we have to remember that. And there's a number of ways we can see this taking place as we look at the Gospel. So, for example, when we look at Matthew, Matthew is very keen to quote the Old Testament, for example. So if you go to Matthew's Gospel, you will see many quotations from the Old Testament. That is also true to some extent in the other Gospels, but it is particularly true in Matthew. And we see it here. One of the early examples is when Matthew relates the story of Jesus' birth. If you remember the story of the wise men visiting Herod, because the story is they see the star in the east, they come to Jerusalem expecting the birth of a king, and so they go to the capital, to where Herod is, and says, where's this new king that has been born? And Herod then consults the priests, and they come to this passage in Micah from the Old Testament. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. So then Herod sends the wise men to Bethlehem, and they find the Lord. But this is not the only time, it's only one time. Even in the birth stories, there are many quotations from the Old Testament which point to the Lord. So this is one of the ways in which we see that Matthew is addressing the Jews. He's writing to the Jews. Matthew has a particular interest in showing the connection between Jesus' life and Old Testament prophecy. So one of the things I did was I look up this word fulfill in the Gospels. And lo and behold, Matthew is the one that uses this word fulfill more than any of the other Gospels. And here's one example. This is the Lord himself speaking, where he says, do not think that I have come to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. And you can see how that statement in particular might be addressed to a Jewish audience who think, oh, Jesus has come to challenge all the things in our scriptures. He's throwing our scriptures away and inventing something new. And Jesus is saying, no, that's not the case. I am fulfilling what the Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures say. And so this is one of Matthew's concerns. This is an interesting connection which I had never realised, but one of my commentaries makes this. In Matthew's Gospel, there are 5 great discourses. Now, does anybody know what a discourse is? It's a sermon. It is a statement which Jesus makes. So these are instances of the Lord standing up and speaking to people and giving them teachings. The one we know very, very well is the Sermon on the Mount, because it's quite long. And it has lots of really good and useful teachings in there. But there's also what they call the missionary discourse, the parable discourse, the community discourse, the apocalyptic discourse. And one of the interesting things that my commentaries point out is there are 5 of them. Now, what's the significance of that to a Jew, do you think? There are 5 books in the Torah, 5 books of the Old Testament law. So we have the Old Testament, and the first 5 books are the most sacred to the Jews. So the fact that there are 5 discourses, some commentators say, well, this is a way of expressing a connection between Jesus' teaching and the Old Testament law, because there are 5. An interesting little detail. And the last thing to say is the very first verse of the book. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And that verse encapsulates within it everything that the Gospel of Matthew is trying to do. Jesus was Jesus' name, like David is my name. Christ is the title, and the title it's the Greek form of the title Messiah. And the Messiah was the king the Jews anticipated would be coming to fulfill the prophecies within the Old Testament. And so here we have it. This is the purpose of Matthew's Gospel, if you like. It is to set out that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah. He is the fulfillment of Old Testament scriptures, of the Jewish scriptures, you see. So, just to show you the way that this particular gospel has a very particular purpose and focus. This is what it is trying to do in an external level. Okay? Now we'll go on in future weeks and we'll look at the other gospels and see how they are different from Matthew. But as you read Matthew, that first gospel, just bear in mind what its aim and purpose is on a literal level. Okay?